Chairman, again, I appreciate this hearing, and I've got a lot of questions. I want to thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle as we explore this situation for sure. But Dr. Grevatt, I'm going to start with you. As you know, the Safe Drinking Water Act that passed out of this committee was very bipartisan. We learned a lot of lessons from Flint. One of the lessons that we learned ended up in legislation that President Obama signed, the Kill the Upton bill, which requires that the EPA, when they know about situations of contamination, that they are required within 24 hours to inform the governor, work with the state on a plan to implement that. So my first question, when I learned about Parchment, Michigan, was, is the EPA involved? And the answer was yes. So I'm very grateful for that. And I brought that to the attention of the acting administrative Wheeler when I talked to him about on the phone within a couple of days. I'm glad to hear about the National Management Plan coming to Michigan. It is something that we want in Michigan, and I know that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will very much encourage that to happen, and I would urge that as part of that visit that you come to Parchment as well, where we've had a lot of different meetings. In mid-July, before we learned about Parchment, I would note that Congresswoman Dingell, Kildee, and myself and other members of the Michigan delegation urged the EPA to review the toxology profile, and if in fact it needed to be adjusted below 70 parts per trillion, that they do so in an expedited process. Quick question, is that happening? What can we do to expedite that process?
Right, thank you.
What is the timing of that?
Thank you, Congressman. So we continue to look very carefully at all of the scientific information that's coming forward related to PFOA and PFOS. That's the focus of the Drinking Water Health Advisory, and we will continue to consider that information going forward as we explore whether those values need to be changed. At this time, EPA does not have plans to change the Drinking Water Health Advisory, the Lifetime Health Advisory for PFOA and PFOS, but we will continue to watch the literature and stay focused on this.
I know that there's legislation that I'm a co-sponsor of that is going to encourage EPA to look at that. So we'll see what happens as that moves. Ms. Sullivan, your role is very important here. Appreciate you being here. I have to say that I was very troubled reading your testimony last night, and that on page 3, you indicate that you'll share information, the Department of Defense will share information in an open and transparent manner. As you know, I wrote a letter back on August 1st relating to the National Guard base in Battle Creek. Testing data had been taken 3 months prior to that, so 4 months now, and MDEQ had Department of Environmental Quality in Michigan had independently found that there were perhaps as much as 21,000 parts per trillion at that site. In addition, our Governor Snyder sent a letter regarding Wordsmith and I think Selfridge as well, which I'll put into the record again prior to August 1st. There was a public meeting held on July 30th. Yesterday, last night, I received a draft report of which I'll put this page into the record. I would note that it's draft, but on page ES4, they tested 14 different sites at Battle Creek. 9 of the sites were over 1,000 parts per trillion. 4 of the sites, one was 3,800 parts per trillion, 4,300 parts per trillion, 25,000 parts per trillion, and 53,000 parts per trillion. So I would say as a non-engineer, I think Mr. McKinley would acknowledge that there's little doubt that it came from that site. So the questions are, where is it moving? There are rivers that are close by. I don't think that there's been a real identification of private wells that are close by. But what is the impact on those? What is the impact on the community itself? But how is that full and transparent when it's now 4 months after the testing? As we saw in Parchment, it was 4 days after the testing that we made it public.
Sir, Thank you for the question. I'm not familiar with the specifics in Battle Creek. I actually lived there for a period of time, so I'm familiar with the area. But I will have to get with the Department of the Army and get the specifics.
Did they share this with you before today?
No, they have not, but I
I mean,
will.
this was literally dropped off at my office late yesterday afternoon, as I understand it. I didn't see it till this morning.
I have not seen it, sir, but I will get with the Army and we will get the answers for you.
I look forward to that because I want to, you know, I agree that we ought to be, that information ought to be in an open and transparent manner, as you indicated in your testimony, and it's not when it's 4 months late, let alone, you know, how do we deal with this in a long-term way for those individuals that are certainly impacted, not only the servicemen and women, but also the folks that are living close, let alone those that are along the Kalamazoo River.
The
Yes, sir.
gentleman's time has expired.